Okay. Okay, I think I'm live now. So hi everyone. Sorry for the delays, technical difficulties. I think Teams can smell my fear. Yeah. I just want to give everyone a heads up that I have my PowerPoint set to full screen, like presentation view. So I will be looking at Q&As on another device, but I'm just one person handling all of this. So I might miss some of your comments. So, yeah, if that happens, I will just back read and answer them later if that's okay, like on Twitter or something. So, yeah, let me just quickly dive through this then. So, hi, good evening from here in Tokyo. It's past 6 p.m. here. And yeah, welcome to my panel on sushi. So first of all, just a quick outline. So yeah, this is what you can expect from this panel, and I think we should be able to finish in 50 minutes. I mean, I will do my very best, like to have some time for Q&A. So first, about myself. So hi, I'm Tifa. So in the Good Omens fandom, I mean, not that I'm popular or anything, but mainly I'm known for being a cosplayer, and I occasionally write fanfics. So I'm Filipino, but based in Japan. But I've been living in Japan for 8 years now, and I work in the travel industry as a writer and a translator from Japanese to English. So just so you know, I'm not talking out of my own ass. So I have experience writing articles about Japan for international audiences for several years now. And I love traveling around, well, not just Japan but also internationally. Okay, so next. So who is this panel for? So I think most of us in the fandom are, at the very least, familiar with what sushi is, but some of us know more about sushi than others. So whether all you know about sushi is that it exists, or whether you've already eaten sushi several times, I've tried to make this panel as accommodating as possible to a broad range of people with differing ranges of familiarity with sushi. So, especially to those who want to make sure that they're depicting a culture accurately and respectfully, well, major props to you. Thank you for that. So, and of course, this panel is for foodies. So you might find yourself craving for sushi after this panel. Okay, and let's go to the next slide. So, first of all, what is sushi? So basically, sushi is vinegared seasoned rice that is topped, stuffed, or mixed with various ingredients. So a common misconception is that sushi is always topped or stuffed with raw fish, but that's not at all true. There are even vegan and vegetarian sushi variants out there. So like here in this second picture, this is sushi as it's being prepared, and as you can see, it doesn't have any meat. It's okra and rice and seaweed. So seafood just happens to be the most common ingredient, and sushi traditionalists tend to just use sushi as toppings, and then like usually if they have a non-seafood variant, it'll be tamago, which is egg, a Japanese style omelette. So if you're going to a traditional and or high-end sushi place, seafood is likely to be the main menu. But if you go elsewhere, as I will explain later, um it's it's not all just seafood at a sushi restaurant. So the common ingredient in sushi is basically the vinegared rice. So preparation techniques and presentation styles vary across households, across regions, and more, which I'll get to in more detail later. So here's a picture of some of sushi. So this is probably what springs to most people's minds when you say sushi, but these are sushi too. So I'll get to these later. So next, let me go to some common misconceptions about sushi, which I am going to debunk. So first, sushi always involves seafood. I just talked about that earlier. And then next, sushi always involves raw toppings. Not at all. I'll also get to that later. And then next, Japanese people eat sushi all the time. Um, well, so to clarify, sushi is a well-known dish, and it's not necessarily expensive, and it's not rare either. But it's not something that Japanese people eat on a daily or regular basis. Because, like, for an everyday meal, there are far more filling dishes like set meals, which offer better value for money and, well, they keep you full. So sushi is nice and all, but yeah, just because it's one of Japan's most popular foods doesn't mean that people eat it all the time. But at the same time, it also doesn't mean that it's a very rare dish that people can only have on special occasions. Okay, next. So let's go to some common terms that are related to sushi. So first of all, we have gari, which is pickled ginger served with sushi. So it's meant to cleanse the palate. Um, so I will get to that in more detail later. And then a sushi chef is called an itamae. So usually so it depends but for some people itamae is used to refer to the master chef, like the head or the owner of the restaurant. And the title that you use to address the itamae is taisho, which is why in Good Omens, well, the show, in the first episode, Aziraphale says, "Taisho waza waza arigatou gozaimasu," which is like, well, not literal, which is like saying, Master, thank you for going all the way to prepare this. I mean, this isn't a literal one-to-one translation, but yeah, because waza waza means like doing something on purpose. And then next you have Kaiten Sushi, which is a conveyor belt sushi restaurant. So it can also be written like this, like with a space in between or with a hyphen. So the thing with Japanese vocabulary is that when you're making compound words, sometimes the first letter of the second word's first syllable changes. And the same applies with sushi. So when you're speaking Japanese and you're making a compound word that involves sushi, the S becomes a Z. So kaiten sushi becomes kaiten zushi. But some people, when writing about these when introducing these terms to an English audience, they may write it as like kaiten sushi instead. Okay. So next you have neta, which is a catch-all term for sushi toppings. Osushi is a more respectful way of saying sushi because o is an honorific. Then you have omakase, which is chef's choice. Like basically you just pay a set price and then leave it to the chef to create something for you. And then sashimi is thinly sliced raw fish or seafood in general. So I would just like to clarify that sushi is not equal to sashimi. They are not the same thing. Like maybe for some people they kind of sound the same, and these terms are often used in conjunction with each other, like sushi and sashimi. Like they often go together, but they are not the same thing at all. So sashimi is just the seafood, like the thinly sliced raw seafood. And then sushi is, well, as I said earlier, vinegared rice. And the sashimi is sometimes the topping for the sushi, but sushi isn't always topped with sashimi. And then sushi rice is called shari. Also, I didn't note it here, but it's also sometimes called sumeshi. And then shoyu is soy sauce. Su is vinegar. Sushiya. Like, or if you wanna say it more respectfully, osushiya is a sushi shop or restaurant. And then wasabi is Japanese horseradish. Okay, and let's go to the next slide. So first, let me give a brief history of sushi. So so the earliest records of what resembled sushi, or like the precursor to sushi, come from second century CE. at the border of South China and North Vietnam. So so here people found the earliest records of fermenting fish with salt and rice to preserve it. But the rice was thrown away because based on the techniques that they used at the time, it was no longer edible after fermentation. And then in the 8th century, this fermentation technique spread to Japan. But because of some variations in the way they prepared it, Japanese people also began to eat the rice with the fish. And then around the 14th to the 17th century, variations in fermentation techniques arose with the invention of rice vinegar. So, for example, this led to different flavors, shorter fermentation times, um, and also different preparation techniques. Um, Oh, and I should also add, fermented fish and rice had a pretty strong smell and a rather sour taste, so it's nothing like today's sushi. This kind of sushi still exists as a delicacy, though, so I'll get to that later. And then in the 1820s or the 1830s in Edo, so Tokyo was once called Edo, a chef named Yohei Hanaya invented the nigiri sushi that we know today. So nigiri sushi is a round or oblong shaped mound of rice with seafood on top. So this sushi is also called Edomae sushi or Edo style sushi, because of the unique style for the time, because of where it originated, again Edo, and because it was usually made of seafood freshly caught from Tokyo Bay. Okay, next. So now let's go to knowing your sushi. So these are the two main, i.e., the most common types of sushi. So these two are nigiri and maki. So again, if you're using sushi as a compound word, to make a compound word, then that's nigiri sushi and maki sushi. So nigiri is named after how the chef has to grip the rice to shape it. The topping is usually sashimi. But as you'll see in more detail later, there are also variations. For example, this illustration here is what a vegetarian nigiri sushi would look like. And then for maki sushi, that's rolled sushi. So there are several subtypes, which I will get to in the next slide. So here are the main maki sushi subtypes. So the regular makizushi involves first laying out the nori, the dried seaweed, on a bamboo mat, then spreading the rice, then laying out the other ingredients in a row before rolling them. But there's one variation that's inside out, which is the uramaki. So this style is more popular outside Japan. The California roll is a type of uramaki. I believe it's the first of its kind. So I've read different accounts about the origins of the uramaki or the California roll, so I'm not sure which is the most accurate. Some say that Japanese American chefs invented it to entice more diners to try sushi because the appearance of dried seaweed put diners off. While others say that, well, basically they just wanted to get experimental. But in any case, this type of maki sushi is more popular in the West, and it's fairly newer than say futomaki and hosomaki. And then gunkan maki is named such because it resembles a battleship, like the shape. You're more likely to see this at casual restaurants. The traditional formal sushi restaurants don't really serve this. So it's a nigiri-sized maki with toppings spread on top. And then ehomaki is eaten on Setsubun, a festival that takes place on February 2nd or 3rd. It's made the same way that you'd normally make maki, though for ehomaki, you're specifically recommended to use 7 ingredients other than the rice for good luck. So the key difference is that after rolling the maki, you don't cut it. You're supposed to it eat the entire thing in one sitting while facing the lucky direction for the year, which is determined based on Chinese astrology for good luck. So basically, if you can eat that in one sitting while facing the lucky direction, then you'll have good luck for the rest of the year. And fun fact, maki sushi with cucumber is called kappa maki because cucumber is said to be the favorite food of a mythical creature called the kappa. And here are some other fairly common types of sushi. Not as common as the others, but I mean some of them are not as common as the others, but you'll still see them here and there. Inari sushi is fairly common. So it's named after the fox god Inari, who is said to love tofu. And then temari sushi, well, they're pretty cute. They're named after temari balls, and they're not to be confused with the cone-shaped temaki sushi that I introduced in the previous slide. That one's cone-shaped. Temari sushi is round, so it's named after a traditional craft called temari. It's a ball that's covered in decorative patterns. And then Chirashi Sushi is popular at parties because it can be easily made for sharing. It's actually the easiest kind of sushi to make, and the recipe that I'll introduce later is this one. It can be as budget friendly or as fancy as you like. So you'll find some chirashi sushi with fewer and or cheaper ingredients like imitation crab, cucumber, or tiny shrimps, but then you'll also find ones with more fancy and more expensive ingredients, like this one in the second photo, which is topped with sashimi. And also, chirashi sushi is also called bara sushi because both chirashi and bara, basically, they're related to the verb scattering. Okay, and I am not going to go through all of these, but here's a non-exhaustive list of some popular sushi toppings, courtesy of this really awesome infographic. So the author repeated a few toppings, and I spotted some mistakes or like terms that are not as commonly used in the context of sushi. So I didn't translate all of them. So yeah, let me just mention a few of them. So salmon is sometimes called shake in Japanese, or as transliterated in Japanese characters, it's called salmon. So but then another Japanese term for salmon is sake, but this is not the same sake that is you as in the liquor. It uses a different character. And then next you have aji or horse mackerel. So just another fun fact. In Japanese, Aziraphale's name is translated as Ajiraferu. So some Japanese artists make puns between that have something to do with Aziraphale and aji, as in the mackerel. So yeah, sometimes it's used as an in joke. And then fugu, so that's pretty infamous. So it's blowfish, and it has a deadly toxin, which would make it pretty deadly for consumption if it's not prepared properly. So chefs need to have a proper license to be able to prepare it. But these days, incidents of fugu poisoning are pretty rare because well, I think people know better by now. Like back then, yeah, I think there were more incidents in the past, but nowadays, fugu, it's not as notorious anymore. Like I see it in more restaurants nowadays, and you're not really likely to die from eating fugu. But some people want to try it for the infamy. It's like yeah, they want to challenge themselves. But honestly, the taste isn't much. It's really just something that people eat to say that they ate it and live to tell the tale. And then next you have otoro, which is the most expensive cut of tuna. And you'll also see a bunch of shellfish names here, like sazae, which is turban shell. Like some of the fish names may not be familiar to you either, but don't worry. I've been living in Japan for a while, and even though my home country, the Philippines, also eats a lot of fish, sometimes I still get the names mixed up. Or like, I know what this fish is called in English, but I can't remember what it looks like. So yeah, don't worry about it too much. And next, let's go to some lesser known types of sushi. So there's sasa sushi, which is sushi wrapped in a bamboo leaf. And there are other leaf wrap variants too, like hoba which is wrapped in magnolia leaf. And then you have beko sushi. So this one is so this is topped with raw fish, but it's seasoned with green chilies instead of wasabi. So it's a specialty of one of Tokyo's islands, Izu Oshima. Tokyo does have islands. Like there are some islands that are part of Tokyo's jurisdiction. So in ancient times, the islanders couldn't access wasabi easily, but green chilies were abundant on the island. So that's what they used to marinate and add spice to their sushi. I mean, now they have easier access to wasabi. They can, because, mainland Tokyo is just a ferry ride away, but this is still a specialty of this island. And it's named after the shiny luster that a turtle's shell gives off, but it has nothing to do with turtles at all. Like this isn't made with turtles at all, just raw fish and sushi rice and green chilies. And then you have funazushi, also known as narezushi. So this is the OG sushi, the one that I mentioned earlier. It's made of rice and fish that was left to ferment, so it has a pretty strong smell. And it's an acquired taste even among Japanese people because, again, it's not that common. It's a specialty of Shiga Prefecture, though. So narezushi is the more widely used term, and funazushi is one of the types of narezushi. It's named after funa. Funa means carp. So funazushi is fermented sushi that's specifically made with a certain carp. And then you have tekone sushi, which is tekone means hand mixed. So it's a sushi rice bowl made with marinated tuna slices. And I am not sure where if you can see it. I'm sorry, I haven't checked my phone yet for the comments or anything, but while I was doing my groceries earlier, I saw that there was a special exhibit for some specialties from Nagasaki Prefecture. So I thought I'd buy this unique sushi that I'd only found out about earlier and share it with you. So this one is called Omura Sushi, which is named after a place called Omura in Nagasaki Prefecture in southwestern Japan. So I thought I'd unbox it here for everyone. I actually opened it earlier just to check, but yeah. So I hope you can see it. Can you see it? Oh, okay. Thanks. Okay. Can you see it? Okay. Okay. Yeah, can you see it? Okay. So okay. Okay. Thanks. Okay, so this is also I would say that this is a kind of oshizushi. It's like a boxed or pressed sushi. So I did some research earlier because I literally just found out about this kind of sushi today. So apparently in the town of Omura, people made this to congratulate their warriors whenever they came home victorious. So they'd make this in celebration, and they'd make them in wooden boxes, and then the samurai would cut them with swords to get them to be square shaped. I mean, they're a big square or rectangle, but yeah, basically they would cut them with their swords into smaller pieces, and so on top you have shredded egg, and then in between, like the traditional ingredients for this are apparently carrots and a vegetable called burdock root or gobo in Japanese, but there are some other variations nowadays. So yeah, and let's go to the next slide. So here we have some modern and or international sushi variants. So hold on. Yeah, so you have so you have sushi cake, you have baked sushi, which is a thing which was a pandemic trend in the Philippines last year. You have sushi donuts, the California roll. There are a bunch of other rolls that became popular that are named after areas in the US, like the Philadelphia roll. And then you also have sushi with unconventional toppings, usually at kaiten sushi, the conveyor belt places. So, for example, shrimp tempura or shrimp with cheese and mayo. Like, yes, shrimp is a familiar topping for sushi, but normally it's served raw. It's like laid on top of nigiri sushi raw, not served like this. And next. So, are modern or international sushi variants inferior or bad? And the answer is nope, not unless you're a food snob. So remember, the nigiri and maki that we know today evolved from nare sushi. So, there's always room for innovation. So, some people will scoff at, say, westernized sushi like the California roll or the Philadelphia roll, but those were created by Japanese Americans. Um, or some sources say Japanese Canadians, but regardless, my point still stands. They were created by the Japanese diaspora. So these are a testament to their creativity and resourcefulness, actually, because these chefs were trying to replicate their cuisine from back home despite the relative difficulty of getting certain ingredients. And then they ended up giving birth to new culinary sensations, which are no less valid. And besides, as the photos in the previous slide show, it's not just diaspora Japanese or like foreigners innovating sushi. Like even in Japan, there are restaurants, not just the kaiten sushi places, that have been having fun adding modern twists to sushi. So I remember attending a maki sushi making session here, and the chef, who was Japanese, said to us, a mix of Japanese and non-Japanese attendees, that if we ever make maki at home and find ourselves with leftover rice and our other ingredients, we could have fun turning them into chirashi sushi or sushi cups, like basically arranging them into cups and presenting them beautifully. Sushi cake and so on. Like he even gave us some practical hacks, like how we could turn leftover maki sushi into oven grilled sushi. Like basically add cheese and mayo on top, chuck everything into an oven toaster, and well, enjoy your oven grilled or baked maki sushi. It was pretty good, and it's a fun modern way to enjoy sushi. So yeah, just because sushi is steeped in tradition doesn't mean there's no room for innovation. There's always room for both traditional and modern sushi. So yeah, as for non-Japanese reinventing sushi, I can't speak for everyone. So of course some people may have different opinions, but my observation is that generally it helps to be respectful and humble. Like, if you want to make modern sushi or like fusion sushi, basically don't say or imply things like how their traditional way of doing it is bad or boring. Basically don't be condescending, like acknowledge the roots of the cuisine, and I think that will go a long way. So yeah. Um so for more reading and research on the authenticity thing in when it comes to cuisine, I've dropped some links because I honestly don't have time to like unpack all the nuances of this issue, but I think it's definitely worth something doing further reading and research on. So yeah, please check out these links if you can. Like for example, Siran's video essay on why people should dunk on Chinese American food is pretty good. I'm sharing this not to conflate Asian cultures together, but because the points that Siran makes here are about the validity and cultural value of diaspora food. And while they were mainly talking about Chinese American cuisine, I think I would say that their points apply to Japanese American cuisine as well. So next we go to sushi etiquette. So some guides go as far as to recommending the prescribed order for eating a sushi course, but I don't want to make sushi seem like a more intimidating experience that it is, because it really doesn't have to be, especially if you're not visiting a very formal place. And even if you are, if the chef has some preferences, like if they recommend eating starting with say this type of sushi, then going to the next, they will usually explain it to you. So instead, I focus on the most basic rules, like how your sushi shouldn't be swimming in soy sauce because it will overpower the taste of the sushi. And even if it's not your intention, it can come off as insulting to the chef because sushi toppings are already seasoned, however lightly. Too much wasabi will also overpower the taste and it'll hurt your nose, so don't do that. And in Japan, sushi is usually made to be bite-sized, so you're supposed to finish it in one bite. I'm not sure though, but I've heard that some portions in the USA can be larger, so you might want to check because this might not apply to sushi restaurants in the West, but generally yeah, you're supposed to eat nigiri like sushi in one bite. And also, picking apart the sushi is considered rude because, like, if you just wanted the topping, you could have just gotten sashimi. Like, you could have gone to a restaurant that just serves sashimi. So yeah, when you're eating sushi, eat everything. Don't separate the sushi from the rice from the topping. That's very rude. And then as for gari being a palate cleanser, what I mean here is that it removes the aftertaste of the previous sushi from your mouth. So after eating one piece of sushi, take one piece of ginger and eat it. And then after eating the gari, you move on to the next sushi. Okay. And next. So at Kaiten, so again, I don't want to overcomplicate things, so I've just focused on the etiquette pointers that I think are worth mentioning. So when in doubt, don't overthink, and remember that generally being polite is the best rule of thumb. So Kaiten Sushi are pretty informal, and then for non-Kaiten Sushi places, some of them have more particular rules, like, oh, I think I didn't mention it here. Hold on, did I mention it? Ah, okay, it's okay. I mentioned it. But yeah, um, hold on. Okay, let me get to some helpful expressions first before I get to the more particular rules for the more formal and upscale sushi places. So some helpful expressions are itadakimasu, which you say before eating a meal, and gochisousama deshita, which you say after a meal. Itadakimasu literally means I receive, but figuratively speaking, it's pretty much just a customary thing to say at the start of a meal. So if you watch like anime, Japanese movies, Japanese dramas, translators or fan subbers, like they don't usually translate this literally because if you're gonna be very literal about this, like translating it as I receive, it comes off as weird. Same with gochisousama deshita, which pretty much amounts to thanks for the meal. So other helpful expressions are oishi, which is delicious. The past tense is oishikatta desu, because oishikatta is the past tense. And then when you're using past tense, you add des afterwards. Um, and then when you want to say thank you, the shortest is arigato. If you want to be polite, it's arigato gozaimashita. But adding domo beforehand is like extra polite. It becomes thank you very much. So, especially if you're sitting at the counter, interact with the chef, but read the room. Don't bother them when if or when they're busy. And ask whether photos are allowed. This generally applies to the more upscale places because some restaurants have a no photos policy. And then for semi-formal and or omakase style restaurants, so usually the omakase style restaurants have a more formal ambience, but not always. Some may be a bit more casual, but certainly not as casual as a kaiten sushi place. They also tend to have limited seating, like 10 seats or less, which is why it's best to reserve in advance. And especially if you have dietary restrictions, that's another case for why you should make an advanced reservation. But I should note that some sushi places cannot accommodate dietary restrictions because again, the traditional places, usually the toppings that they use are seafood. So if you have a seafood allergy, they may not be able to accommodate you. Or like if you're vegan or vegetarian. But I will get to some vegan and vegetarian recommendations later. And I should also note that a bunch of formal restaurants in Japan have a no perfume rule. It's pretty much a given at these places because they tend to be small. So the chefs believe that perfume, especially if it's really strong, can affect other guests and your own enjoyment of the food. So yeah, don't wear perfume when going to a formal sushi restaurant, and be polite. Eat everything that's served to you. So again, omakase means chef's choice. Like you leave everything to the chef. So it would be rude to be picky and not eat something just because you don't like it. Okay, so this section is for those planning to visit Japan in the future. So I made like a spectrum of sorts. So for takeaway sushi, there are some takeaway only sushi shops like Chiyoda Sushi. You can also find takeaway sushi at convenience stores, supermarkets, and department store basements. In Japan, department store basements are usually reserved for food. So if you're a foodie, you'll enjoy browsing through these floors. So these are the most budget-friendly option. For convenience store and grocery varieties, they're not necessarily the freshest, but because food safety standards in Japan are generally pretty high, you shouldn't have to worry about whether or not they're safe to eat. If you just want to eat Japanese sushi and you're not particular about like having the most delicious sushi, or you don't have a very high budget for spending on food, then yeah, this should be a good option. If you find the flavor of takeaway sushi a bit lacking, I saw a hack on Japanese social media about chucking it in a microwave at 500 watts for around 30 seconds, quick enough to just slightly warm the sushi, but not long enough to cook the toppings, which apparently will improve the flavor. So yeah. And then kaiten sushi. Sushi here costs as low as 100 yen, which is around $1 per plate. You usually get a plate with two pieces. This is usually for cheaper toppings, but with more expensive toppings, they can go as high as 200 to 400 yen per plate. The plates are color coded, and these places usually have a tablet like device displaying the prices. So you can also use these devices to place an order if, say, it's been a while and you still don't see the sushi that you like going around. And then for casual, you have yeah, some of these names here are some of the popular kaiten sushi chains: Sushiro, Kura Sushi, Kappa Sushi, Genki Sushi. And then for casual restaurants, yeah, some standalone restaurants like the mom and pop type ones, they're budget friendly to mid range, and the atmosphere is usually pretty casual. And then for high-end ones, these are usually like Michelin starred, and or they've been in the business for decades, some even for centuries. Yeah, so for high-end places, a meal at these can usually range from 10,000 to 40,000 yen on average. So that's 100 to 400 US dollars. Some of them are so exclusive that you can only get in if you've been invited by someone, or if you're staying at a luxury hotel and the concierge makes a booking for you. So the famous Sukiyabashi Jiro of the documentary Jiro Dreams of Sushi, that's one of those places. And next, so in general, fish markets will have sushi shops nearby. The most famous, easily Japan's most famous fish market is Tsukiji. It's known for an early morning tuna auction, but that's actually moved to Toyosu Market. Tsukiji had an outer and inner market. The inner one was for wholesalers, and that's where the tuna auction took place. But again, it already moved to Toyosu. So now only the Tsukiji outer market remains, but it's still thriving. It's a fun place for foodies to explore, and there are lots of seafood restaurants around, including those specializing in sushi. Lots of street food too. And then you have, say, Nishiki Market. It's not exclusively a seafood market, but it does have some sushi places too. And then if you want to do some exploring beyond Tokyo, I mean, I get why most people stick to the big three of Tokyo, Osaka, and Kyoto, but Japan has several prefectures and towns by the sea that are known across the country for their fresh, high quality seafood. So this is not an exhaustive list, by the way. So as you can see in this map, Japan has a lot of prefectures that are surrounded by the sea. So most of them will have their own small towns that are known for seafood. It's just that these prefectures that I listed are some of the best known among foodies and travel enthusiasts. And here are some of my personal recommendations. I just stuck to Tokyo because while I do like to travel, these are some places that I have been to, like that I can vouch for, and I remember them. So again, you should be able to find tons of delightful places outside of Tokyo too. I haven't been to the high-end sushi restaurants actually, so I can't personally recommend them, but I'm sure they're good. You can easily look up the top recommendations for high-end sushi in Tokyo because yeah, it's usually pretty much the same names. They will come up in these listings like Jiro. It has two branches. Like the one in Ginza is headed by Jiro himself, and the one in Roppongi is headed by his son. And then some other high-end sushi places like Kyubei and Sushi Saito. For kaiten sushi, I don't have a particular favorite. They're all pretty fun. I already mentioned some of the popular names in the previous slide. So for my recommendations, I just focused on the middle ground, especially since I read an article a few years ago about how independent mom and pop sushi restaurants are facing a steep uphill battle because they're the middle ground. Like people either want their sushi cheap and hyper efficient or on the high end scale. So yeah, I thought I'd focus on the middle ground here. And next, so I also did some research on vegan and vegetarian sushi and halal or Muslim friendly sushi. I haven't been to any of these places, but I thought it would be nice to include them as well. So to my knowledge, there hasn't been a restaurant that specializes entirely in vegan or vegetarian sushi. More like these are restaurants that have vegan or vegetarian options, or these are vegan slash vegetarian restaurants that happen to have a sushi set. So yeah, and then as for halal sushi, yeah, we have Japan's first halal sushi restaurant in Asakusa. And then this last one that I listed, Itamae Sushi. So their seafood and vegetables are not halal certified, but they call themselves Muslim friendly because their seasoning is halal, and then their Muslim friendly menu options do not use pork derived products, or alcohol. And then next, let's go to Chirashi Sushi. So, yeah, I didn't put the exact measurement. So, like I said earlier, this should be the easiest type of sushi to make, even though it's not the kind of sushi that you usually think about. So, you can customize it according to your budget and according to what ingredients you have. I've just listed some simpler ingredients here, but you can make it fancier, like with say sashimi and fish roe. And the only ingredient that some people might have difficulty finding, if depending on where they are, would be rice vinegar or sushi vinegar. But generally, sushi Asian groceries should have them. And then, yeah, here are the instructions, which you can check out again later when the recording is up. And then when you're done making the chirashi sushi, you can refrigerate the leftovers to feed you for the next few days. So, this can be eaten at room temperature or chilled. So, yeah, it's a pretty handy dish, and it's also great to make for a party. And that's pretty much it. So, thank you for listening, and let's yeah if you like feel free to follow me, although I should say that my Twitter account is multi-fandom. So yeah, thank you so much for listening, and I think there should be time for some quick Q&A, but yeah, let me just unshare my screen. Okay. Okay. um Hold on, let me check the Q&A. um Sorry. Oh, interesting question. Okay. I think for Aziraphale, I would say egg, like tamago, the Japanese style omelette. Um, Actually, when for Setsubun this year, I was thinking of making I so I mentioned eho maki earlier, that long maki sushi that you don't cut. I was thinking of making like an Aziraphale and Crowley set. And for Aziraphale, I was thinking of using egg. So yeah, I think for Aziraphale, like egg could be a good topping because the yellow color resembles Aziraphale's motifs. And then for Crowley, I think makizushi would be good because makizushi, like the seaweed, is a green a green that's so dark it almost looks black. So yeah, that could be a good option. So yeah, hope that helped. Oh, I don't have my chopsticks next to me. Maybe I can take a picture on Twitter and give a report later. Okay. Let's see. Good question. Okay. Let me think. Okay, there's this fish called Tai, T-A-I, Thai or sea bream. In English, it's called sea bream. That one's pretty good, but Thai is not cheap. Like it's, I wouldn't say it's like as high end as like otoro or fatty tuna, but like it's not that cheap either. But it's really like the texture is really tender and it's pretty good. So yeah, I think that's the sushi that I'd love to eat for the rest of my life if I could, but I'm not rich, so I can't. Okay. Yeah. So I'm sorry. Yeah, because like I wasn't able to check the chats and all, but thank you Lumi for helping me out, and thank you to everyone for listening. So yeah, enjoy the rest of your day slash night, and yeah, I'll see you around. Bye.